Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and I have here the long-awaited and much anticipated, at least by me, Elysian Pilgrim. And the reason I've been anticipating this release is because Elysian has a couple of really solid releases, one of them being the Elysian Annihilator and the other being the Diva, which is actually one of my current favorites. But the reason the Pilgrim is such an exciting release is because it's so much less expensive than either of those other releases. Now, as of this moment, Hi-Fi Go has not officially released the Pilgrim, so I don't know the exact price, but from what I understand, it's going to be around $400, and it's going to be their least expensive release yet, which means the Elysian brand will now be more accessible to a broader scope of consumers, which is super, super cool. So as usual, we'll go over what's included in the box, we'll talk about the specifications and design, and then we'll jump into the sound. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Included in the box are the IEMs and cable, of course. It also includes a pretty nice case, a cleaning tool, a cleaning cloth, and then a small assortment of the SpinFit CP100 ear tips, which are actually some of my favorites. And again, as of the time of me shooting this video, they have not released the price, but based on what I'm hearing, I'm thinking it's going to land around $400, which makes this their most affordable set to date. Now, as far as the driver configuration, it has a hybrid setup, and it consists of 3 balanced armature drivers and 1 dynamic driver. And the drivers are housed in a very high-grade aluminum shell, which means, of course, structurally they feel very robust and well-made, but they're still relatively lightweight and very comfortable to wear as well. Now, speaking of comfort, I love that they included these SpinFit CP100s because they're simply great ear tips, and I was able to get a good seal and a secure fit with no problem right away using those tips. Now, those of you who are familiar with my reviews, you know how much I love a faceplate with a well thought through design. I think one of my recent favorite faceplate designs is on the Tangzhou Zhuanwu Gate, at least under $1,000. And now this is my new favorite, under $500. And if you read about the story behind the concept of the design, it's actually quite cool. Apparently the inspiration was based on a Pilgrim's first journey, and the steps or tiers in the faceplate were inspired by the topography of small natural rolling hills. So I can just kind of imagine this pilgrim journeying through these rolling hills towards whatever his destination might be. I just love that imagery. But here's the thing, you can have really inspirational concepts, but poor implementation, and it can completely miss the mark sometimes. But that's definitely not the case with the Pilgrim. This is a very well implemented concept, and I think whoever was behind the concept and design of the Pilgrim 100% hit the mark. I absolutely dig everything about it. Now, one thing I don't dig is the Pentacon connectors on the cable. The cable itself is great. It has basically no memory at all. It's very easy to roll up and store, so it's manageable, and it's just otherwise well made. And it also seems to be constructed of decent quality materials for this price range as well. And it also goes very well with the aesthetics of the shell. I just wish they would start using 2-pin connectors. In any case, again, it is a great cable, and overall, I think it works well with the Pilgrim. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So the sound signature of the Pilgrim is what I would consider to be kind of riding that line between neutral and U-shaped. So what that means is there is going to be a little more emphasis on treble and sub bass. You're gonna have nice amounts of sub bass rumble, but maybe a little more of a relaxed upper mid-range, and then a fairly substantial amount of energy coming again from the high frequencies from the treble, which kind of follows Elysian's house sound for the most part. The Diva takes kind of a similar approach to its tuning as well. Now, I do need to say I find its presentation to be just a tad on the bright side, which is fine from an engagement standpoint, and it wasn't necessarily a problem for me. However, it may not be for everyone, so just something to consider if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, if you're sensitive to a more bright signature. But let's go ahead and break things down a little further, and we'll start with the bass. I'll just tell you right now, the bass is probably my favorite part of the Pilgrim, and for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because of just its general tuning. They handle the transition out of the bass into the mids very well with the bass shelf, or that initial rise out of the mids into the bass, starting right at around 200 hertz. So you get a fairly clean separation between the bass and the mids with virtually no bass bleed into the mid-range at all. It actually rivals, in my opinion, the Studio 4, but with even more bass energy. I do feel like I'm getting a little more maybe bass speed, but it's not that much of a difference with the Pilgrim, and you get all of the added benefits of a dynamic driver, like great dynamics, great slam, plus it has just a little more of that tactility and physicality, which I absolutely love. Not even to mention, again, you've got that great sub bass extension as well. So you have those sub bass frequencies laying a very solid foundation for the rest of the bass. This might be my favorite bass under $500. Sorry, Studio 4 and Performer 8, but that's the truth. I love the bass of the Pilgrim. Now, where the Studio 4 might best the Pilgrim, again, in my opinion, is in the mid-range. Now, the reason I keep referring to the Studio 4 is because it's my top IM under $500, and right below that is the Performer 8. But one of the standout attributes of the Studio 4 for this price range, in my opinion, again, is how natural its mid-range is. There's just nothing that sounds more natural under $500 that I've heard. Now, the Pilgrim does come close, and I mean really close, but I just think that the Studio 4 renders instruments and vocals so well. So that's in the upper mids, but I just want to go back to the lower mids quickly, because I do think I prefer the added low mid energy the Pilgrim brings. I like it a lot, and the reason I like it so much is it adds richness, it adds just a little bit of warmth, but it doesn't bleed or introduce any muddiness. Again, it's quite controlled, so you've got just the right amount of richness and note weight, but none of the problems that can sometimes come with it. So that's the low mid. We've already talked about the upper mids, so let's go ahead and talk about the treble now. So like I said, because of the amount of energy in the treble, sometimes the presentation can come across a little bright, but for me personally, it never reached the point of becoming fatiguing. It's definitely a little more energetic in the treble presentation, but I still think it works very nicely with the rest of the Pilgrim's tuning. And more importantly, it renders everything naturally. It renders hi-hats naturally, cymbals naturally, and most of the other higher frequency instruments, again, very naturally. So it never reaches the point of sounding peaky or uncontrolled. So I guess the bottom line for me is, despite the treble's brighter presentation, it still sounded generally correct, and it works nicely with this tuning approach. Of course, another very important attribute I look for is treble extension, because those frequencies above 10K are what is basically responsible for rendering air and shimmer that can sometimes be present in a recording, and it can also reveal some of those micro details that kind of add that finishing touch or just complete the picture, so to speak. And the Pilgrim does that really well. It has excellent extension, and it definitely does its job of revealing those micro details and that air and sparkle. But what about technical performance? Well, it's very good. Maybe not quite to the levels of the Studio 4, but it does push very close. As a matter of fact, it's right about in line with the Performer 8, in my opinion, as far as detail and micro detail. Now, one area I do think the Pilgrim might perform a little better in is in imaging and instrument separation. It also has nice soundstage width as far as IEMs go, and it has pretty good forward depth as well. It's not super deep and immersive, but it at least is as good as the Studio 4, which again, that's excellent for this price point. Now, when it comes to just general tuning, I also prefer the Pilgrim's weightier presentation over both the Performer 8 and Studio 4. And I also prefer the Pilgrim's overall bass presentation over both of those as well. Although I do think the Studio 4's overall tuning is just a little more natural sounding. So I guess if I had to rank these three, which these are my three favorites under 500 right now, I would still put the Studio 4 in the top spot because its tuning is just very good. It's simply some of the best under $500. Now, the more difficult decision would be between the Performer 8 and Pilgrim, because they both have attributes that I absolutely love. The Pilgrim has a little more note weight and just better bass performance, but the Performer 8 sounds really natural in its upper mid-range tuning. It's really tough because I really love both of them. But if I had to choose, I think I would have to give that second spot to the Pilgrim because it's still tuned great and it has equal, if not slightly better technical chops over the Performer 8. But I think the thing that I really love about the Pilgrim is its bass tuning and just its overall bass presentation. But I also like that small amount of added mid-bass. It gives the Pilgrim a slightly richer presentation and it adds just a little more note weight, but without affecting low-mid detail and without introducing any muddiness. It's still very clean and controlled in that transition from the bass into the mid-range. And I have to admit, there's also something about its presentation that brings a little more excitement to the table and makes it just a little more engaging than the Performer 8, in my opinion. Now, let me clarify, all three of these IEMs are exceptional in their own ways, and all three of these get a very strong recommendation from me. And I think it's really just going to come down to your personal tuning preference and also your budget, but all three of these are absolutely great. So that concludes my review of the Elysian Pilgrim. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this review. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.